Let's break this down. I'm joined by my Friday guest. You guessed it. I'm here with litigator Richard Schoenstein. Rich, good morning to you. It's good to see you. Unique situation, but maybe not that unique, right? I mean, we both know that people face a big danger behind bars. And I guess here it's an interesting argument that Jake Wagner, in his position, ratting on his family, that could put him at jeopardy, no? That could put him at risk.
I'm sure it could, but what I don't understand, it's the point the defense attorney was making there asking questions, that that boat has already sailed. He already is testifying. He's been testifying against his brother. That is established. That is public knowledge. I don't know why it makes any incremental difference whether or not the testimony is shown live on television. I mean, first of all, are the inmates sitting around watching Law and Crime Network all day? Are they streaming us? Are they seeing this? If so, hi. But second of all, you know, they already know. He is already a snitch as far as it matters. So I just don't get it. I think this testimony should be shown. I would think the prosecution would want their case to be shown, to be seen by the community that they're representing so that they have credibility. I haven't understood this from the beginning of this trial, and I still don't understand it.
Well, on top of the fact that you just got a whole new fan base in about 10 minutes. Let's see here, the letters
between that and the new Twitter, I'm going to be in great shape.
Gene Rossi raised an interesting point the other day. I'll throw it over to you. The idea that if Jake, one of the reasons that they want to keep Jake Wagner safe is because he may testify in the trial of Billy Wagner, the upcoming trial of the father. And so you need to keep him safe right now because he's still pivotal to the prosecution's case. What do you think?
Well, I love Gene, and I think that's a great point. And the more I've watched this trial, the more it's become clear to me that the prosecution's real goal here is Billy Wagner. This case isn't that great, and I'm not sure you would have traded the death penalty against Jake for getting a conviction against George Jr., who apparently didn't pull any of the triggers. My guess increasingly is that the prosecution really wants Billy in jail, that was the real purpose of these deals with Jake and Angela. And this trial is something of a warm-up for that trial. That's the feeling I'm starting to get, and we'll see how this trial goes. But I think that's an excellent point. They probably do want to keep him safe from that. And I'm sure they want to keep him safe. I mean, it's not in the state's interest to make a deal with a prisoner and then have him get killed. Yeah. I mean, that you know, first of all, you just don't want someone to die, and second of all, that's not great for your deal making going forward. So I'm sure they want to keep him safe.
Let's do two questions. A, do you think at the end of this trial, this has really brought, justice to the family? I'm not sure if closure would be the right word. And two, I'll give you an opportunity to jump in on the appeal question that I raised before.
To answer the first question, I think it is the best we can do to bring them justice. This is a complete conviction of the person who did this crime. They're not going to do any better. It probably, I mean, it doesn't solve what happened. Now, on the second question, I have heard from other analysts who think maybe this defendant didn't get a fair shake. And from some analysts that I really respect and I'm friendly with and I admire their thinking, but I disagree with them here. This defendant was determined competent by outside medical professionals, and the judge also determined he was competent by observing his conduct in the court and his ability to stand up and articulate arguments, his ability to research, his ability to mount a defense. The fact that he acted outrageously does not alter the fact that he was competent. It was his choice to act that way. But when he had an opportunity to stand up and give an articulate argument like he did in his opening statement and his closing statement, and even some of his examinations, he was fully able to do it. We couldn't upend the trial just because he took his shirt off or hid behind a box or engaged in other petulant behavior. You can't change the rules when the defendant acts outrageously. You have to deal with it. And I thought the judge did not only a proper job dealing with him, I thought she did a magnificent job dealing with him. I think the chance of a successful appeal is slightly higher than zero.
But having said that, if he had competent representation, say he had the best lawyer in all of Wisconsin, do you think that he still would have been found guilty of across the board of all 76 charges?
Probably, but he would have had a slugger's chance at some of this. First of all, a lawyer wouldn't have let him speak other than if he was going to testify, right, and they would have had to make that decision. But other than that, he wouldn't have stood up. All this nonsense he did in the courtroom only hurt him with the jury. I mean, none of that helped him. He thought maybe he was garnering sympathy. I don't think he garnered a lick of sympathy from anybody. So the lawyer would have kept that down. The lawyer would have had some sort of cohesive strategy and might have made more of some of the reasonable doubt kind of arguments. Are we sure we've identified that he was the driver? Are we sure the prosecution has proved intent? For me, it's impossible to run into 70 people with your car other than intentionally. I don't know how you get past that, but his only shot at getting past that was with a lawyer.
Well, I tell you what, not that it helped him at all, but a lot of what happened was outside the presence of the jury. But what he did do, and as you mentioned, even though he was instructed by the judge to be quiet, when the jury was coming in, he kept speaking and saying, I think the jury has a right to know what you're doing to me. I mean, he had this kind of warped perception of what not only he was entitled to, but a warped perception that he was the victim and the jury was going to side with him. That Jennifer Crumbley allegedly said, I'm not mad, you just have to learn not to get caught. She wrote that to her son over text message regarding him getting in trouble for looking up guns at school. How bad is that? Because again, it's unique to charge parents in this kind of case.
It's very unique. And you know, the first thing I think about this case is another school shooter case. I mean, they're just, you know, way too many of these, as we've said before. And this is unique now because the shooter has pled guilty and we're prosecuting the parents. And as a lawyer, what I have to say about it is I think it's a tough road for the prosecution to prove that the parents, that they have a level of culpability that would make them responsible. It's not like they knew he was going to go to school and do this. This is a case about recklessness, about negligence. They let him have a gun. They didn't lock up the gun. They told him, as you say, be careful, don't get caught. They didn't adequately police his tendencies that were being shown. So it's a really interesting case. As a lawyer, I think it'll be tough to establish. As a parent, I think they should be ashamed of themselves.
I think that was really well said. All right, so Rich, I'm back here with litigator Richard Schoenstein. What an interesting balancing test, right? Because obviously, if someone is disruptive of the proceedings, they can be kicked out of the courtroom, right? This is a little unique. I'm talking about a defendant. This is unique because he's representing himself. But there can be situations where even a defense attorney, if they act improperly, could be kicked out of the courtroom as well, right? I mean, I guess the question is, you know, it seems on the outset very simple. She had the right to kick him out, but then you're hearing people on the other side saying, well, you know, if he's representing himself, it kind of becomes difficult for the judge, and you know, he claimed he couldn't hear in the other courtroom when all the evidence suggested that the volume was well, loud, and clear. Should she have made sure he had the headphones on? Where do you stand on all that?
Well, I think she gave him tons of leeway. You're right. A judge can kick anybody out of the courtroom who is being disruptive to the process. The judge has a responsibility to maintain the decorum and the sanctity of the courtroom. So the judge can kick out lawyers, defendants, witnesses, spectators. This judge did kick out a spectator during the reading of the verdict. He's not the only person that got kicked out during the trial. So the judge can absolutely do that. Nobody has the right in a courtroom to do whatever the heck they want to. Nobody has a right in a courtroom to challenge, show disdain for, and insult the judge. And she put up with a lot more of it than most judges would. And she certainly put up with a lot more of it than anybody would put up with from a lawyer.
Yes, and there were times when he was yelling at her, and I was just struck. I said, he's yelling at a judge right now. It was kind of hard to believe. Well, for me, the most explosive moment of the trial, I'm not going to lie, she did say defendant a little. Defendant. I mean, a little bit. But look, I think the point was with this was just, again, you talk about leeway. I don't even think she kicked him out of the courtroom at that point. She stopped the proceedings, but again, a lot of leeway there.
A lot of leeway. We've been talking about this case for a few weeks. Have I mentioned to you yet that it's a bad idea to represent yourself at trial?
Why don't you do it one more time?
Because this is a really good example. So he wants to argue that the witnesses for the prosecution are coached, That's actually a valid argument. And there's an effective way to do that. You do it on cross-examination. You ask the witness questions. Mr. Witness, you met with the prosecution before giving your testimony this morning, didn't you? How many times did you meet? How long did you meet? They suggested to you the questions that they would be asking so you could practice your answers, didn't they? You can ask a witness effective questions if you're a trained and skilled interrogator. But if you're just some guy in off the street who doesn't know how to do it, you can't do it effectively. So he's complaining to the judge that the witnesses were coached because he doesn't know how to deal with that. He should have had a lawyer. The lawyer would have known how to deal with that. I still don't think he would have won, but the lawyer would have been able to deal with his argument about coaching of witnesses.
I mean, it was so curious for him to say that the DA must not care about these people because we're focusing more on the alleged defendant, not even him, the alleged defendant, and when he's the one who killed these people. So it just made me wonder what you thought the jury might be thinking of that and what you took away from that.
I'll tell you what I took away, and I suspect maybe the jury was on the same wavelength. You know, I have been guilty during this trial of, you know, being a little glib about the antics of this narcissistic nitwit. It has sometimes been entertaining. But at the core of this is a horrifying crime. There was a Christmas parade. Jingle Bell Rock was playing in the background, and this guy drove his SUV into this parade, striking dozens of people, running over people at full speed, killing 6 completely innocent people, including 4 people in or associated with a troupe called the Dancing Grannies, and an 8-year-old boy. He devastated that community. He killed people, he devastated that community, he nearly ruined Christmas. And then he came into this court and he tried to blow up the court with his nonsense, with his subject matter jurisdiction, with his lawful law, with his sovereign immunity, with his jury nullification. He tried to drive and swerve through the court and destroy that too. But the court held, and the town of Waukesha held, and those victims held. Everybody except the people he murdered survived his attack. And for him to return over and over to the effect on him, I feel bad for his kids. I feel bad that they're his kids. That's what I feel bad about. I would have feel bad about that no matter what the outcome for him. It doesn't move the needle on the punishment he deserves. This was a horrible crime, you know, but you can't break Christmas, and you can't break, thank God, you cannot break the United States judicial system.
I wish we could leave it there because that was just so well said about this. And I think that's a great point because his misunderstanding or misapplication of the law, or whatever you want to call it, you know, it was interesting. I always wondered, we haven't had the opportunity to interview any of the jurors yet, but they had these 76 charges and these multiple counts. And I'm curious, you think the way that they went through it, do you think they went through it in blocks? Do you think they said, because they even found him guilty of the domestic violence related counts with respect to Erica Patterson. They believed that he attacked her. They believed everyone but him.
Right. I think they probably did it in blocks. We have 6 murder charges. They are all the same answer. We have 61 reckless endangerment charges. Those are all the same answer. And then we have the domestic abuse. I think there were some evidence charges, but there were 76.
And the bail jumping.
Right. But they could break them down into 4 or 5 categories. And he didn't have a defense on any of them. Right? He didn't testify. He didn't put in any meaningful evidence. He never gave a cohesive story. So I think the jury had to break those down, but at the end of the day, there was nothing to prevent them from entering guilty to each and every one, except for having to write it down 76 times.
I would have been very curious if he would have taken the stand and what he would have testified to, and also subject himself to cross-examination. Not saying he would have done it, but it would have been something remarkable to see. But as we know, he forfeited his right by not answering the court. Richard Schoenstein, the man. Pleasure as always. Thank you so much for coming on, sir. I am signing off. Dimitri Ganias is up.